Wild West outlaws and gunslingers are famous for some pretty incredible tales. But some of these tales can't be verified as well as some of the others. So you'll notice in some of these that we'll have a range of numbers based on confirmed and also possibly embellished numbers. Please enjoy. Robert Clay Allison, also known as Clay Allison, was a notorious figure in the American Old West. Born on September 2nd of 1841, he was the fourth of 9 children of Jeremiah Scotland Allison and Mariah Ruth Allison. His father was a Presbyterian minister who raised cattle and sheep to support the family. Clay worked on his family farm near Waynesboro, Tennessee, until he enlisted in the Confederate Army at the age of 20. During the American Civil War, Clay enlisted in the Confederate States Army with Captain W. H. Jackson's artillery battery on October 15th of 1861. However, he was medically discharged 3 months later due to an old head injury hindering his ability to serve. Clay then re-enlisted on September 22nd of 1862, this time with the 9th Tennessee Cavalry Regiment, where he served under the Confederate Wizard of the Saddle, General Nathan Bedford Forrest. He surrendered at Gainesville, Alabama, with Forrest's men on May 4th of 1865 at the end of the war. After being held as a prisoner of war briefly, he and the other soldiers were paroled on May 10th and allowed to return home. Once back home, Clay was involved in several violent confrontations. A popular story relates that a corporal from the 3rd Illinois Cavalry arrived at Allison's family farm with the intention to seize it. After a confrontation and the breaking of his mother's vase, which had been an anniversary present to her from his father, Clay took a rifle from the house and killed the man. Whatever the reason, Clay, along with his brothers Monroe and John and sister Mary and her husband Lewis, soon moved west. In New Mexico towns of Cimarron and Elizabethtown, Clay began to develop a reputation as a dangerous man during the Colfax County War. In the fall of 1870, a man named Charles Kennedy was being held in a local jail in Elizabethtown, accused of going mad and suspected in the disappearance of several strangers and his own son. A mob, led by Clay Allison, broke into the jail, took Kennedy from his jail cell, and hanged him. When Kennedy's house was later searched, the bodies of those missing, including his son, were found. Allegedly, Clay Allison cut off the man's head and carried it in a sack for 29 miles to Cimarron, where he placed it on display on a pole in front of St. James Inn. He believed himself fast with a gun, but this changed when he was outdrawn in a friendly competition with Mason Bowman. Bowman and Clay had become friends, and Bowman helped Clay improve his fast draw skills. One of the most famous incidents in Allison's life occurred on January 7th of 1874. Allison killed a notorious gunman named Chunk Colbert, who had already killed 7 men by that time. The 2 men had raced their horses and entered the Clifton House, an inn located in Colfax County, New Mexico, where they sat down for dinner. During their meal, Colbert suddenly drew his pistol and attempted to shoot Allison. However, the barrel of his gun struck the dinner table, allowing Allison to draw quicker with his own revolver. He fired 1 shot, which struck Colbert in the head. When asked later why he accepted a dinner invitation from a man who likely tried to kill him, Allison replied, and this is so badass, quote, "Because I didn't want to send a man to hell on an empty stomach." This incident only added to Allison's reputation as a deadly gunslinger. Another violent encounter occurred during the Colfax County War when Allison allegedly led a lynch mob to kill Cruz Vega, who was suspected of murdering Reverend F.J. Tolby. Vega was hanged from a telegraph pole near Cimarron. Vega's family members, led by his uncle Francisco Grigo, began making threats of revenge. They went to Lambert Inn, where they confronted Allison and accused him of taking part in the lynchings. Grigo reached for his revolver, but Allison was faster and shot Grigo twice and killed him. Allison was charged with murder, but the shooting was ruled as self-defense. Allison's reputation as a deadly gunslinger had grown over the years, and he was involved in many other violent incidents. In December of 1876, He and his brother John were involved in a gunfight with a constable and his men in Los Angeles, Colorado. John was hit 3 times, and Clay fired 4 shots, killing the constable. The Allison brothers were arrested and charged with manslaughter, but again the charges were dismissed as the constable had initiated the gunfight. Clay Allison died on July 1st of 1887. There is some mystery to his death. Some say he was trampled by his own horse while he was drunk, but others have been saying that he was shot by a hired killer. Thomas Horn Jr., also known as Tom, was born on a family farm in rural northeastern Scotland County, Missouri in 1860. At the age of 16, Tom left for the American Southwest, where he was hired by the U.S. Cavalry as a civilian scout, packer, and interpreter under Al Sieber during the Apache Wars. He quickly provided himself as a capable scout and rose through the ranks. During one instance, the army was ambushed by Apache warriors as they were crossing the Sibecue Creek. The officers in charge of their squad, Captain Edmund Hintig, was killed instantly, and the men became pinned down under overwhelming fire. In a desperate attempt to repel the attack, Sieber ordered Tom and another scout, by the name of Mickey Free, to break away and return fire from a hill. Together with the soldiers, the men managed to repel the attack. Tom and Sieber also participated in the Battle of Big Dry Wash and gained recognition when they slipped through the banks opposite of the Apache line and provided cover fire for the cavalry, killing a number of Apache warriors. Tom, a respected scout, known for going out alone on reconnaissance missions and helping track down Geronimo's major stronghold. By November of 1885, he earned the position of Chief of Scouts under Captain Emmett Crawford in Fort Bowie. However, during one operation, Tom's camp was mistakenly attacked by a Mexican militia, and he was wounded in the arm during the shootout, which resulted in Crawford's death. On September 4th of 1886, Tom was actually present at Geronimo's final surrender and acted as an interpreter under Charles B. Gatewood. Tom allegedly killed his first man in a duel, a second lieutenant in the Mexican army, as a result of a dispute over a prostitute. After the war, Tom used his earnings to build his own ranch in Arizona. His ranch consisted of 100 cattle and 26 horses, and he also laid claim to the Deer Creek mining district near the canyon. Unfortunately, cattle thieves stormed his ranch one night and stole all of his stock, resulting in a tremendous loss and bankruptcy for Tom. This incident marked the start of Tom's hatred and disdain for thieves, which led him to entering the profession of range detective. Tom Horn took jobs as a prospector, ranch hand, and rodeo contestant, but he is most notorious for being hired by numerous cattle companies as a cowboy and hired gun to watch over their cattle and kill any suspected rustlers. Tom developed his own means of fighting thieves. Quote, "I would simply take the calf and such things as that stop the stealing. Add more faith in getting the calf than in the courts." If he thought a man was guilty of stealing cattle and had been fairly warned, Tom said he would shoot that thief and not feel, quote, one shred of remorse. During the Wilcox train robbery investigation, Horn gathered vital information about 2 outlaws, George Curry and Harvey Logan, who killed Sheriff Josiah Hazen during their escape. Both of them were members of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch and known as the Hole in the Wall Gang, named after their hideaway in the mountains. Horn relayed this information to a man named Charlie Sirigo, who worked on the case for the Pinkertons. Horn joined the U.S. Army to serve during the Spanish-American War and was the chief packer for the 5th Corps. He left for Cuba, where he led some of the packed trains to the front. Horn personally witnessed the bravery of the famous Rough Riders and the colored regiments, the 9th and the 10th Cavalries, during the assault of San Juan Hill. Horn and his men were under constant fire as they delivered rations and ammunition to soldiers, although they were non-combatants. During his time in Cuba, Horn contracted yellow fever, which led to him being bedridden and deemed unfit for combat. Upon returning, he returned to Wyoming and began working in 1901 for a wealthy cattle baron named John C. Cobble, who belonged to the Wyoming Stockmen's Association. Tom Horn's story takes a turn when a man named Kells Nickel was shot and wounded, along with 60 to 80 of his sheep. Two of Nickel's young children reported seeing two men leaving on horses. On August 6th, Deputy Sheriff Peter Wallamount and Deputy U.S. Marshal Joe LaForce came to Iron Mountain, Wyoming, and arrested a man named Jim Miller and his sons Victor and Gus on suspicion of shooting Kells Nickel. The investigation of the shooting of Kells Nickel was added to the investigation of a man named Willie Nickel's murder in the coroner's inquest. Deputy Sheriff Joe LaForce later questioned our man Horn on January of 1902 about the murder while supposedly talking to him about employment. Horn was still inebriated from the night before, but LaForce gained his confidence and called for confession of murder of Willie Nickel. Horn allegedly confessed to killing young Willie with his rifle from 300 yards away, which he boasted of as, quote, the best shot that he had ever made and the dirtiest trick that he had ever done. Tom Horn was arrested the next day by the county sheriff. A man named Walter Stroll was the Laramie County prosecutor in the case, and Judge Richard H. Scott, who presided over the case, was running for re-election. Horn was supported by his longtime friend and employer, cattle rancher John C. Cobble. Despite the strong defense team assembled by Cobble, the evidence presented against Horn was overwhelming. Horn's own drunken confession to Deputy Marshal Joe LaForce provided to be the decisive factor in his conviction. The prosecution also presented other circumstances of evidence linking Horn to the murder, including his proximity to the crime scene and the known animosity between another family and the Nickel family. The trial lasted about 10 days, and Horn was found guilty of Willie Nickel's murder and sentenced to death by hanging. The verdict was met with mixed reactions, with some members of the community hailing it as justice served, while others viewed it as a miscarriage of justice. Tom Horn's execution was carried out on November 20th of 1903 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He maintained his innocence until the end and was said to have met his death calmly and bravely. The legacy of Tom Horn continues to be debated and contested to this day. Some view him as a cold-blooded killer, while others see him as a victim of circumstance, as a scapegoat for a powerful cattle interest in Wyoming. Whatever one's perspective, there's no denying that Tom Horn lived a fascinating and controversial life, and one that has captured the imagination of countless people over the years. Jim Miller, also known as Killer Miller, was an outlaw born in Van Buren, Arkansas in 1861. His family moved to Texas when he was just 1 year old. Miller's life of crime began with the murder of his sister's husband, a man named John Coop, in 1880. Coop was found dead in his bed with a shotgun blast, and Miller was soon arrested since he was known to hate his brother-in-law. Although he was sentenced to life in prison, his attorneys took the case to the Texas Court of Appeals, and the conviction was overturned on a technicality. However, this encounter with the law did not deter Miller from a life of crime. He joined an outlaw gang in San Saba County, Texas, and began robbing trains and stagecoaches while committing murders. Miller even bought a saloon in San Saba and became an assassin, earning a reputation for completing jobs quickly and efficiently for a fee that varied between $150 and $2,000. He was notorious for assassinating his targets at night with a shotgun, and despite his work, Miller never drank, cursed, or smoked. Even though in the picture he's smoking a cigar, so I'm assuming he smoked cigars, maybe just not cigarettes. He was always well-dressed and regularly attended church, and that earned him the nickname Deacon Miller on top of his other nickname, Killer Miller. In 1893, Miller became the town marshal of Pecos, Texas, and earned a reputation for killing Mexicans, claiming that they were trying to escape. He then began a feud with the Pecos sheriff, George Bud Frazier. Frazier contacted the Texas Rangers to intercept Miller's plans to shoot him when he returned to town, resulting in Miller's arrest to conspire to kill the sheriff. However, Miller managed to avoid conviction by having his henchmen track down and kill all of the witnesses. The feud between Frazier and Miller culminated in 1894 when Frazier encountered Miller on the street and opened fire, leaving him for dead. However, Killer Miller had been wearing a metal breastplate under his black frock, and he survived the encounter. Frazier eventually moved to New Mexico after losing his sheriff election. Despite his family's wealth through real estate, Miller continued to work as an assassin into the early 1900s. His assassination business rivals attorneys, lawmen, and anyone who received an assassination request. Despite being seen during these assassinations, Miller managed to stay out of jail either by claiming self-defense or just having all of the witnesses murdered before trial. That just blows my mind. Miller's luck ran out in 1909 when he was contracted by ranchers Jesse West and Joe Allen to assassinate cattle rancher and former deputy U.S. Marshal Gus Bobbitt in Ada, Oklahoma. Miller shot Bobbitt with a shotgun, his signature move, but a 19-year-old cowhand named Oscar Peeler witnessed the crime and turned the men in. The Texas Rangers tracked the men down and extradited them to Oklahoma to stand trial. However, Ada residents were aware of Miller's reputation for getting his convictions overturned and decided to take matters into their own hands. A lynch mob of 30 to 40 people broke into the jail and dragged Miller and his 3 accomplices to a stable behind the jail. Despite his accomplices' pleas, Miller remained stone cold and requested a diamond ring be given to his wife and wear his black hat during the hanging. His request was granted and he shouted, quote, "Let her rip," before voluntarily stepping off the box to hang. Miller's body was returned to Texas and he's buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Fort Worth. John Wesley Hardin, born in the state of Texas in 1853, was one of the most infamous killers on the Texas frontier. He earned his criminal reputation at the age of just 15 after a deadly altercation with a former slave named Mage, whom he killed in a claimed self-defense after beating him in a wrestling match. Knowing that the Union soldiers would come looking for him, Hardin's father sent him into hiding. However, the authorities finally discovered his hiding place and 3 Union soldiers were sent to arrest him. Instead of surrendering, John Hardin decided to confront his pursuers. He stated, quote, "I waylaid them, as I had no mercy on men whom I knew only wanted to get my body to torture and kill. It was war to the knife for me, and I brought it on by opening the fight with a double-barreled shotgun and ended it with a cap and ball 6-shooter. Thus, it was by the fall of 1868 I had killed 4 men and was myself wounded in the arm." After this encounter, Hardin became a fugitive, traveling across Texas while drinking, gambling, and killing. One story recounts his run-in with the famous Wild Bill in Abilene, Kansas. While on the run, an 18-year-old John Wesley Hardin, known as Little Arkansas in town, was in Bullhead's Tavern for a drink. A man named Ben Thompson tried his best to get Hardin to confront Wild Bill over a dispute at Ben's saloon. Ben Thompson told Hardin, quote, "He's a damn Yankee. He picks on rebels, especially Texans, to kill." Hardin responded, "If Bill needs killing, why don't you kill him yourself?" The story becomes legendary when Wild Bill confronted Hardin for wearing guns in town, which violated town ordinance. Wild Bill ordered Hardin to hand over his guns, and Hardin surprisingly agreed. When Wild Bill went to grab the guns, which were handed butt first, John Hardin flipped them around so the barrel was facing Wild Bill. Historians think that this story is unlikely, but it does add to the legends of these outlaws with their confidence and bravado, making these stories believable. In 1872, John Hardin became involved in a Texas feud between the Suttons and the Taylors, aligning himself with the Taylor family, resulting in even more deaths. Celebrating his 21st birthday in Comanche, Texas, Hardin spotted a beloved deputy sheriff named Charles Webb. Hardin asked the deputy if he was there to arrest him, which the deputy denied. Hardin then invited the sheriff over for a drink, and when the sheriff entered the hotel, Hardin and his accomplices opened fire and killed the deputy. The murder of Charles Webb did not go unpunished. Governor Richard B. Hubbard offered a reward for Hardin's arrest, and the Texas Rangers intercepted the letters that Hardin was sending to his family, discovering that he had fled to Florida. In 1877, the Texas Rangers caught up to Hardin and placed him under arrest. They were only able to subdue him after Hardin's Colt 44 pistol was caught in his suspenders. Hardin was tried for the killing of Charles Webb and sentenced to 25 years in prison in the town of Huntsville, Texas. While in prison, Hardin began studying theology and wrote an autobiography that's said to be wildly exaggerated. In 1894, Hardin was released from prison after serving 17 years of his 25-year sentence. He moved to Gonzales, Texas, where he passed the state bar exam and obtained his license to practice law. On a scorching day in August of 1895, the notorious gunslinger John Wesley Hardin met his end in a saloon in El Paso. The day started with an altercation between Hardin's acquaintance and a local lawman named John Selman Jr. Hardin, never one to shy away from a fight, confronted Selman's father, Constable John Selman Sr., who was himself a notorious gunman and former outlaw. Tempers flared as the two men exchanged heated words, and their eyes locked in deadly stare-down. Hardin, known for his lightning-fast reflexes, had his hands hovering over his holster, ready to draw at a moment's notice. But Selman Sr. was faster. In a split second, he drew his own gun and fired a shot that hit Hardin in the back of the head. The saloon erupted in chaos as people scrambled for cover, their ears ringing with the sound of gunshot. Hardin, lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood, muttered his last words. Quote, 4 6s to beat. It was a chilling reminder of a man's love for gambling and his reckless disregard for his own safety. Selman Sr. was later acquitted for murder, but his own life would come to an end just as violently as Hardin's. As for Hardin, he was a notorious gunslinger who was said to have killed 27 men, though himself claimed to kill 42 men before his death. Today, he lies buried in El Paso, his legacy as a ruthless killer and outlaw still haunting the town to this day. The history of John King Fisher is a little bit of a mystery. We know some things about John King Fisher, but his kill count is kind of disputed. I'm going to give you a quick background to the story, but at the end I'm going to tell you why it's a little more disputed on his kill count and why I think it's so much higher than the rest of them. King Fisher was born in October of 1853 in Collin County, north of Dallas, Texas. His father was a cattleman and owned and operated freight wagons. After the Civil War, they bounced between Austin, Texas, and Dallas, Texas, and Fisher was eventually sent to live with his brother James outside of Austin and was picked up for stealing horses at a young age. See, after his release from prison, Fisher started working as a cowboy, breaking horses, and then he found himself taking part in posse activities because of raids, looting, and essentially rapes of Texas ranch and farm families by bandits. As a result, his successes in this arena, he fancied himself a gunman. Fisher became proficient with a gun and started running with a band of outlaws that frequently raided into Mexico. A dispute arose within the group over how the spoils and loot would be divided, leading to a shootout where Fisher managed to kill 3 of his fellow bandits. Fisher then took over as the leader of the gang and killed 7 more Mexican bandits over the next several months. In 1872, Fisher bought a ranch on the Rio Grande near Eagle Pass in Maverick County on the Mexican border. He used this ranch as his gang's base of operations and even placed a sign on the road that read, "This is King Fisher's Road. Take the other one." Fisher mostly raided and rustled cattle across the Mexican border during this time, committing acts of violence and theft against Texas settlers. By the late 1870s, Fisher had gained a reputation for being fast with his gun. He served as deputy sheriff of all things, and later as acting sheriff of Uvalde County in Texas between 1881 and 1883. During his time, he trailed 2 stagecoach robbery suspects, Tom and Jen Hannum, to their ranch near Leakey in Real County, Texas. Tom resisted, and Fisher shot and killed him. Jim surrendered and was taken into custody along with the stolen loot from the robbery. Fisher's life actually took a tragic turn in 1884 when he attended a play with his old friend Ben Thompson, a gunfight and gambler in San Antonio, Texas. Thompson was unpopular in San Antonio as he had earlier killed a popular theater owner named Jack Harris, leading to a feud between Thompson and friends of the killed theater owner. Fisher and Thompson were ambushed and murdered after the play at the theater on March 11th of 1884. Fisher left behind his wife, Sarah, and 4 daughters. The reason I say his kill count is disputed is we think we know that he has killed 26 people during his time as an outlaw, bouncing between Mexico and Texas. But interviewed before his death, they talked about the notches that he had on his pistol. And when asked, they said, "What are those notches?" And King Fisher says, "These are the men I've killed, and I don't count Mexicans I've killed." So, in one of the earlier parts of this video, when I put 26 to 37 plus, we think he's killed 36, but he had 37 notches on his gun, and he's not counting the people from Mexico that he's killed. So, we don't know the true story to that. He's not as well known as some of the other ones, but if we take into account his killing spree that we know about, then I can assume that it's probably the same number of unaccounted for Mexican individuals on top of the 26 to 37. So that's why at the beginning I said, we think we know. That's all I could find. If you do know something more about John King Fisher, or something more official, please leave it in the comments because we continue. If we can find out more information and put it out there, that's what we need to do.